Welcome back to the Wizard Shop. This time around, it's Ferrari diagnosis. Right after this. Well, before we get started, I actually wanted to thank you guys. We're in this first real week of this coronavirus lockdown, as some of you have called it in the comments. And likewise, some of my business has actually kind of died off. The local day-to-day customers have all canceled their appointments. But luckily I have still a shop full of cars to fix, and I have you guys. I wanted to thank you guys for the views that you give me, and in turn it turns into money, which helps keeps this place afloat. We're all going to be going through some hard times here in the next few weeks. Hopefully it's just a few weeks. I hope it's not more than that. But how do you know, or what's going to happen? I don't know. But again, I wanted to thank you guys. So we're a small business. We don't have $5 million in capital laying around. So this is where we make our money. You guys and this kind of work. So let's get started. This car was brought to me not too long ago. Whenever you would drive it, it would take off full power and it would do just fine. All of a sudden it would just kind of die off. The power would die. It's almost like it was going into a limp mode. No check engine lights. The owner was like, I'm not sure what's going on here. So he handed it to me. I did some checking. I connected my Autel scan tool to it. And there's just one code. It's a code that's basically saying it's not able to reach closed loop mode on the driver's side of the engine. Now these have two computers. This car treats the one single engine as if it's two separate engines. 6 on the left, 6 on the right. It's a V12. The driver's side is where the issues were. I'm going to walk you guys through the steps of how I came to find out what's wrong with this car. But if that's all you have is the driver's side is not able to get into closed loop mode and there's a loss of power upon acceleration, that's all you have to go with. Where do you start? And how do you get to the finish line? That's what we're going to do today. Here it is, guys, the venerable Ferrari 550 V12 engine. As you can see, it has this one airflow sensor for this side, one airflow sensor for this side, a fuel rail for this side, a fuel rail for that side. Everything is divided into two on this engine. This is something you have to keep in mind when you're diagnosing these, especially these older Ferraris where there's not one single ECU. There's two of everything. The 355, the 348 Ferrari, all these are like this. It's right down the middle. You have two of everything. So the first thing I did was I smoke tested the intake. Maybe there's a vacuum leak. And it came up with nothing. Everything's sealed. There's no leaks. I know that these cars have problems with corrosions at the ECUs and corrosion on the different sensors and things. I was checking around with that. I didn't find any corrosion. I did remove the connectors from the ECMs and check for corrosion. Let me show you what I did on that. So we are in the passenger footwell. I have this kick panel out of the way. Right here's the ECM where my finger's touching. That's the main connector. There's also one identical to this setup over there on the driver's side. One for the passenger side, one for the driver's side. I took the connectors off and checked them. There was no corrosion. I did apply some Stabilant 22 just to make sure that there's nothing going on there. That did not solve the problem. I checked wiring, I checked grounds on the valve covers, the ECM grounds, different things. No problem there. So let's go back under the engine bay out there, under the hood. So we did a smoke test. It revealed nothing. I checked grounds, I checked connections, I checked the ECMs, made sure there's no corrosion. We found nothing. Nothing out of the ordinary. So I checked for misfires, I pulled a few plugs, they all looked good. There was no issues with the ignition system. Here on the passenger side, you can see I hooked a fuel gauge up to the fuel rail for the passenger side, and it's about 55, 52 PSI, right around in there, which is pretty good. That's about what it should be. But it was a total different story when I hooked it to the driver's side. It was barely registering 20. I did check the fuel pressure regulators. There was no issue there. It just wasn't building any pressure on this side. That makes sense why he would go and drive it and maybe have power for a few seconds and then it would lose power because there's just no pressure there to continue going. That also started to make sense why the computer is noticing that it can't reach into closed loop mode because there's not even enough fuel pressure there to operate properly. But the computer didn't tell us that. This is where you have to start digging. This is where you have to start checking systems because the computer says, I can't make it into closed loop mode. And you're like, well, why not? And the computer says, that's your problem. You find out. So you have to find out. Now, let's go back into the trunk. Let me show you what I found there. Some of the testing that I did, some of the things that I did to diagnose and figure out what was going on before I started disassembling the fuel tank. So here we have the fuel tank. You have to disassemble quite a bit to get to it. But I had the fuel pump in place and the lock ring and everything in place. And what I would do is I just turn the key on to let the pump cycle. And I noticed something didn't sound right here on the driver's side. But I needed the pumps to run individually so I could isolate which side it is. So after getting everything here where I could listen and I could kind of visualize what's going on, I went to the passenger footwell again and let me show you guys what I did there. Okay, so behind you where your foot goes here, this is kind of like a footboard. There's the relays and fuses and things of that nature. What it is, pulled it down. Over there you can see all kinds of modules. There's security modules, ASR modules, all kinds of different things. But the thing I was getting at is right here is the relay board. And if you look right here, there's right-hand fuel pump and left-hand fuel pump. It shows where the relays are at, which is right here and right here. I was able to take my handy-dandy relay manual switch that I've showed you guys before. It's for sale on my Amazon affiliates page. But I remove the relay and place this in place of it, and I'm able to manually force the pumps to run. Now let's go back to the trunk. So here we are back at the fuel tank again. When I would turn on the passenger side fuel pump, it sounded healthy, it sounded fine. You could hear a very high-pitched whine, and then you could hear the fuel flowing through the lines. It sounded perfect. So when I would energize the driver's side pump, it sounded really, really bad. I knew from sound that's enough information and enough data for me to go ahead and ask the customer, can I go ahead and disassemble and pull the pumps out? He said, yes, go ahead. So when I pulled this pump out, let's head over to my toolbox. I have the old fuel pump. Let me show you what I found. So here we have the fuel pump module for the driver's side pulled out. When I removed this, let the gas drain, and kind of just started to examine what's going on, this had cracked and broken. This is the pressure feed line off of the fuel pump. It was just laying down there in the fuel tank. There's a rubber surround that goes around this fuel pump. And as you can see, it's just disintegrated. This is from ethanol. It's just destroyed. Destroyed it's called a gasket, is what they call it if you look on the parts list. But the problem here is the pump sits down in this bucket shaped piece, which is the screen. There's the screen right here. The gasket separates the pump from the screen so it sucks up clean fuel. The gasket turned into this. That all went inside the fuel pump and just tore it to pieces. The other side somehow is magically still working, but I can assure you it is right behind this one. It will be doing the same thing within 6 months. So the plan of action here is to replace both complete assemblies. You could get piecemeal here or there, but by the time you buy all these pieces, you can just buy the whole module. And it's pretty expensive, guys. It's about $1,400 or $1,500 per side. That's the parts. There's no labor there. That's just the parts. Welcome to Ferrari, guys. Now, this is a common problem with the 550, 575s, that this little gasket just disintegrates. And when I pulled this out and found this, I was like, yeah, I knew this is the problem, this is a common issue. We're going to have to flush the fuel lines, new fuel filter, new pumps, and he'll be back in business. He'll be able to achieve that 55 PSI roughly on both sides at that point. His car will be able to go into closed loop mode. Everything will be happy. So let's head back over to the car and finish up. And thought you guys might want to see what I found in this car. Now there is one plus to this. Being that it's a front engine Ferrari, I actually enjoy the fact that these pumps are like this. It wasn't a huge teardown. I didn't have to drop the tanks. I didn't have to do a whole bunch of trouble. You want to talk about a hard fuel pump? That Camaro is a hard fuel pump. I have to drop the whole rear axle and drop the springs and drop the track bars and everything just to get the tank down. It was absolute nightmare. That's a $10,000 Camaro. And you can see how we got this thing running again on Hoovie's garage. It's actually his car. It's alive again. Check out his channel and watch that video. You can see what we went through to get it that way. This is not a $10,000 car. It's probably worth 5, 6, 7 times that. But it's so much easier to work on. There's a lot of mechanics I've talked to, and I mentioned that I work on Ferraris and Lamborghinis and things, and they're like, oh my God, those are so hard to work on. How do you do that? And I'm like, no, they're not. They're not hard to work on. You just have to be careful. You have to take your time. You don't get in there and break stuff and break bolts and strip stuff out. You just have to be very careful and be open-minded. If you got an old school mechanic in here and you started discussing with him about this car, how there's one ECM for each side of the car, one airflow sensor for each side of the car. If you're looking at data on a scan tool, you need to look at the left side versus the right side. He'd be like, hey bro, you lost me here, I'm done. I'm not even gonna touch this car. I don't want nothing to do with this car. It's so far above and beyond what I'm used to. But if you have an open mind, you take your time, these actually aren't that hard to work on. So the next plan of action, I'm going to remove the passenger side pump. We're going to replace it anyways because it doesn't make sense to try to run that one until it dies. It's going to die. And I'm already here. I already got the panel out and access. It's time to take care of business here. And the owner understands we're going to take that course of action. Replace both of these pumps. But before I do, I'm going to drain all the gas out, clean out the tank, make sure there's no debris in there because as you've seen, there's lots of debris. Flush the lines. New fuel filters, flush the fuel rails, make sure there's no debris in there. Then we'll put it back together with new pumps, new filters, and he'll be in business. That right there, what went wrong in this fuel tank, did not show up on a computer. There's no scan tool that's going to show you that. There's times when a car pulls into the shop, you read the codes, and it really doesn't even help you. It doesn't really even tell you what's going on. I spent about 2 or 3 hours getting down to finding out what's wrong with this. So I wanted to thank you guys for following along with the diagnosis steps that I took to find out exactly what's going on with this car. It's a really beautiful car. I've worked on it a couple times before. It's an amazingly fast car. It's beautiful. I really like this car. I love the V12 engine as well. But I thought you guys would enjoy to follow along. I know you guys are a lot of you are in lockdown right now, and like I said, we're going to deliver and give you guys some really good content. Some things to take your mind off of the stresses and things that are going on out there. And now we can look at Ferraris and talk about Ferraris instead of masks and all these other things that we're worried about. So I just showed you the relay switch that I used in the footwell down there. I have many more cool tools for sale like that, guys. Check my Amazon affiliates in the link below. We also have it for sale in the UK, different things on the Amazon affiliates UK. I also have Auto Trader articles that I've written and videos. Head on over to Oversteer, Auto Trader Oversteer, and check that out. Click the link below. And hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. We got many more cool videos to come. And thanks for watching.